You wanna know what she said, she might just change your life.
A couple of days ago, you sent this article and you said, I don't think enough time was spent on this, and I have to agree with you. And what it refers to is Canada's Auditor General is saying hundreds of inmates from maximum and medium security penitentiaries are being dumped back into communities across the country. And dumped is right, because they haven't been gradually reintegrated, and this seems to be showing that they're more likely to reoffend because they haven't had that gradual process in.
That's exactly right. And this type of finding should come as no shock to those of us in the business. And it has really interesting issues from a financial standpoint and a management of risk standpoint, which I think our fellow citizens should be really interested in, especially with an election coming up and where we've seen the government going. Because now, over the last, I guess, decade, we've seen tremendous changes in the crime bills because the tough-on-crime policy
mandatory
has been popular.
sentencing, right?
Mandatory minimums, which the Supreme Court just struck down now for gun-related offenses. All this sort of feeds into, though, that government has sought votes through a politically expedient way, which is to say we're tough on crime, and no other party is going to really oppose that. But the real challenge that comes out of that is, are we making it safer for Canadians? And we're not. We're making it more expensive for Canadians. And it's not safer because an individual who would, let's say, get a 10-year sentence, and people in the public might go, yay, that's great. But the reality is they're getting out at 7 or 8 years with very little skills, having been institutionalized for that long period of time, and will now come out and not be able to be productive members. So they're going to go back into crime. That's really the risk that we're running. If they get out at about 3 years and have a 7-year period of parole where they're strictly supervised, involved in vocational programming, all sorts of activities, they can then be integrated. And from a risk management standpoint, we're far better off as Canadians. And the expense, what was this expense, Stacey, for housing?
It's millions of dollars more to keep these federal inmates actually in custody than it would be to release them on a parole program and reintegrate them slowly into the community. So while crime rates have been dropping in Canada, we're actually seeing an increase of federal inmates staying in the system, which of course becomes much more expensive for Canadians.
And we're talking millions and millions of dollars.
$91 million, in fact, since March 2011.
Yeah.
So, but where I get a little confused is the total number of men in federal penitentiaries has grown by 6% over the past 5 years. They're staying in custody longer because they're not going out, but a lot of them aren't applying for parole when they're eligible to. And they've asked
they won't get it.
Is that why?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a depression about really being eligible for parole that I just think people don't even bother anymore. And then the other thing is there needs to be a little bit more of an investment in programming in the federal system. We see it completely gutted from the provincial system. So for those people who don't know, any sentence of 2 years or less is served in the provincial system. And, you know, what's the programming like, Stacey? I mean, it's virtually non-existent.
It's virtually non-existent. And while in the federal system there's much better programming for inmates, it's not mandatory that the inmates, while they're incarcerated, take advantage of the programming. But if an inmate is released on parole, it does become mandatory that they engage with whatever program that their parole officer deems necessary. So that's the difference.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.